Greetings, warriors and dreamers. Welcome to the realms of sleep, where tonight we journey through the epic world of God of War. I am your guide through the 9 realms, where ancient gods whisper their secrets and mythic landscapes unfold before us. From the frost-covered mountains of Midgard to the golden halls of Asgard, these tales of gods and giants will carry you into peaceful slumber. Lay down your weapons, rest your weary head, and allow the legends of these powerful beings to become the landscape of your dreams. The battles have been fought, and now is the time for rest. So close your eyes, brave one. Let the fire of the hearth warm you as we begin our journey through realms both wondrous and dangerous. The late autumn air carried a sharp chill as Kratos and Atreus made their way along a narrow mountain path, their footsteps crunching on the thin layer of frost that had formed overnight. They had been tracking a herd of deer for most of the morning, following prints in the soft earth that led them higher into the peaks than they typically ventured. The hunt had taken them through winding valleys and across rocky plateaus, the terrain growing increasingly unfamiliar as they climbed. "Father, look," Adrian said, pointing to a small opening in the mountainside ahead, partially concealed by overgrown vines and fallen rocks. "There's something there." Kratos narrowed his eyes, studying the dark crevice with cautious interest. It appears to be an entrance of some kind. Drawing closer, they found what was unmistakably a carved archway, its stonework weathered by centuries of exposure, but still bearing intricate patterns that wound like serpents across its surface. Dwarven runes, faded but legible, had been chiseled into the keystone. "Can you read it?" Kratos asked, knowing his son's proficiency with languages far exceeded his own. Atreus ran his fingers over the ancient lettering, brow furrowed in concentration. "It says, Nidavelir's Reach, and something about the Song of the Mountain." He looked up at his father with curiosity brightening his eyes. "I think it's an old dwarven mining colony." Kratos grunted non-committally, but his gaze lingered on the entrance. Their hunt had yielded nothing thus far, and daylight would remain for several hours yet. "We will explore briefly," he decided. "Stay close." The boy nodded eagerly, already slipping his bow from his shoulder to free his hands for what lay ahead. Together they approached the entrance, Kratos pushing aside the tangled vines to reveal a passage that descended steeply into darkness. The air that greeted them from within carried an unusual warmth, accompanied by a scent of earth, minerals, and something else. Metallic, yet strangely sweet. More surprising was the sound, a distant rhythmic tapping that echoed up from the depths, almost like the steady beat of a heart within the mountain itself. "Do you hear that?" Atreus whispered, his voice hushed with wonder. Kratos nodded, his hand instinctively moving to the Leviathan axe secured at his side. "Something dwells within." They ventured forward, their eyes adjusting gradually to the dimness. The passage widened after several yards, opening into a roughly hewn chamber supported by thick wooden beams darkened with age. Ancient lanterns hung from iron hooks embedded in the walls, their crystal reservoirs empty of the magical fuel that once illuminated these depths. "Wait," Kratos said, reaching into his pack to retrieve a small bundle of pine knots soaked in resin. With practiced efficiency, he struck a spark and lit one, creating a torch that cast flickering orange light throughout the chamber. In this new illumination, the craftsmanship of the dwarven miners revealed itself more clearly. The walls bore tool marks from countless hours of careful excavation, and veins of various minerals, copper, iron, and occasional glints of something more precious, ran through the stone like frozen rivers. Small niches had been carved at regular intervals, each containing what appeared to be offerings, tiny hammers, miniature anvils, and other symbols of the dwarven craft. "These are shrines," Atreus observed, examining one of the niches. "Mother told me about them. Dwarven miners would leave offerings to earth spirits, asking for protection and guidance to rich veins. As they progressed deeper, the rhythmic tapping grew more distinct, now accompanied by what seemed to be voices. Faint, indistinct, yet undeniably present. The sound carried a melody that rose and fell like waves, sometimes building to a crescendo before fading again to barely perceptible whispers. "It sounds like singing," Atreus said, tilting his head as if to better capture the elusive notes. The tunnel branched repeatedly, creating a complex network that might have been disorienting if not for the consistent sound drawing them forward. Kratos marked their path with small notches in the wooden support beams, ensuring they could find their way back, regardless of what they discovered ahead. After perhaps 20 minutes of careful navigation, they emerged into a vast cavern that drew involuntary sounds of amazement from both travelers. The chamber stretched upward into darkness, its ceiling lost beyond the reach of their torchlight. Massive crystal formations jutted from the walls and floor, catching and refracting their light into countless rainbow patterns that danced across the rough stone surfaces. Most striking, however, were the dwarven structures built throughout the space. Wooden platforms connected by bridges created a three-dimensional network throughout the cavern. Minecarts on rusted tracks, some still laden with ore, stood frozen in time, as if their operators had simply stepped away momentarily. Tools, pickaxes, hammers, chisels lay scattered across workbenches and beside partially completed excavations, and everywhere there were signs of music. Crude drums fashioned from hollow logs and stretched leather, wind instruments carved from bone and horn, metal plates of various sizes suspended from frames designed to be struck like bells, an entire orchestra of mining implements repurposed as musical instruments. "This is incredible," Atreus breathed, his eyes wide as he took in the abandoned workshop. "It's like they just disappeared." The rhythmic tapping they had followed echoed more clearly here, reverberating off the cavern walls in complex patterns. Now they could detect distinct layers to the sound. The lower, steady beat like a drum, overlaid with higher, sharper tones that mimicked the cadence of speech or song. The sounds, they're coming from the crystals, Atreides realized, approaching one of the larger formations that pulsed with subtle light in time with the rhythm. He reached out tentatively, his fingers hovering just above the smooth surface. "Careful, boy," Kratos warned, but his son had already made contact. A soft hum immediately filled the air around them, and the crystal's glow intensified. The rhythm they had been following suddenly clarified, as if someone had removed a thick cloth from over a speaker. What had been indistinct now resolved into a clear pattern, the unmistakable sounds of mining, pickaxes striking stone, the grind of drills, the distant crack of supporting timbers being positioned. But beneath these practical sounds lay something else. Voices, dozens of them, singing in the ancient dwarven tongue. The melody was simple but haunting, rising and falling like the breathing of the mountain itself. Atreus closed his eyes, his expression one of deep concentration. They're singing about the earth. he translated slowly, about listening to the stone, following the song of the minerals. He opened his eyes, excitement clear on his face. Father, I think this is how they found where to dig. They weren't just mining randomly, they were following the music of the earth itself. Kratos approached another crystal, this one embedded in the wall beside what appeared to be a particularly rich vein of silver. With characteristic caution, he placed his palm against its cool surface. Immediately, a different melody emerged, similar in structure to what Atreus had activated, but distinct in its specific patterns. This song carried a triumphant quality, celebratory, rather than searching. The songs are different, he observed, withdrawing his hand as the melody faded. I think each crystal holds different memories, Atreus suggested, moving deeper into the cavern, where the formations grew more numerous and varied in size, like echoes of what happened here. They continued their exploration, discovering that each crystal they touched revealed another fragment of the dwarven miner's experience. Some played sounds of intense activity, multiple voices calling instructions over the clang of tools and the rumble of minecarts. Others held quieter moments, solitary humming as a craftsman worked, or the soft rhythmic breathing of sleepers in a rest period. In a small alcove off the main chamber, they found what appeared to be a gathering space. Rough-hewn benches encircled a central fire pit, now cold and filled with ash. Above hung a massive crystal formation, unlike the others. Not a single piece, but a complex chandelier of intergrown shards, each catching and reflecting light differently. When Atreus touched one of the lower crystals, a chorus of voices filled the space. Dozens of dwarves singing in harmony, their deep voices resonating with such presence that it seemed the singers might materialize at any moment. The song was complex, with multiple overlapping parts that created rich harmonies and counter-melodies. It's beautiful, Adrian whispered, reluctant to speak louder for fear of disrupting the ethereal performance. Even Kratos stood in uncharacteristic stillness, his stoic features softened slightly by what might, in another man, have been recognized as appreciation. The music carried no obvious magic, no enchantment designed to manipulate or control, yet its effect was undeniable, creating an atmosphere of reverent calm throughout the chamber. As they listened, Atreus began to translate fragments of the lyrics, his voice barely audible beneath the dwarven chorus. The mountain breathes, its heart beats in stone. We who listen learn its secrets. The ore sings to those with ears to hear. The song continued for perhaps 5 minutes, before gradually fading, leaving behind a silence that felt strangely emptier for its absence. Atreus turned to his father, eyes bright with the joy of discovery. They weren't just mining, father. They were communicating with the mountains somehow, using music to find the richest veins, to know where it was safe to dig, to understand the stone itself. But Kratos nodded thoughtfully. The dwarves' connection to earth and metal is well known. This appears to be an expression of that bond. They moved deeper into the mining complex, discovering chambers dedicated to different aspects of the operation. In one, massive furnaces stood cold but intact, surrounded by molds of various shapes and sizes. Another contained row upon row of workbenches, each equipped with specialized tools for refining and shaping raw materials. Throughout their exploration, the crystals continued to offer glimpses into the daily lives of those who had once populated these caverns. Most revealing were the numerous small chambers cut into the walls, living quarters for the miners, each personalized with carvings, small shelves of possessions, and, in many cases, musical instrument. Ime lived here permanently, a truce observed, examining a particularly well-preserved dwelling. Not just working, but making homes within the mountain. In this chamber, they discovered something new. A small, leather-bound book resting on a simple stone shelf. Its pages had yellowed with age, but remained legible, filled with handwritten notes and diagrams in the dwarven script. Atreus gently lifted the volume, careful not to damage its fragile binding. "It's some kind of journal," he said, slowly turning the pages. "Notes about different songs and what they mean." He continued reading, occasionally translating passages aloud. The deep iron sings with 3 voices, harmonizing in fifths. Silver whispers rather than shouts, its melody heard only in the silences between beats. Gold has no song of its own, but amplifies the voice of any metal near it. As Atreus read, Kratos moved to examine a large map scratched into the wall beside the bed. An intricate rendering of the mine's layout, with certain tunnels marked with musical symbols rather than conventional notations. The complexity suggested years, perhaps decades of careful documentation. "Look at this," Atreus said suddenly, holding the book open to a page near its center. It talks about something called the Heartstone, a crystal at the center of the mountain that contains all songs simultaneously. It says that those who hear the Heartstone's full chorus gain understanding of the mountain's deepest nature. Kratos frowned slightly, his instinctive wariness of powerful artifacts asserting itself. Such objects often carry hidden dangers. "It doesn't sound dangerous," Atreus countered, continuing to scan the text. "More like a record, a library of everything the mountain has experienced." He looked up at his father, enthusiasm clear in his expression. "It says there's a chamber below this level where they kept it. Can we look for it?" After a moment's consideration, Kratos nodded. "We will investigate, but exercise caution. Not all knowledge is meant to be claimed." They returned to the main cavern, where Atreus, consulting the journal, identified an unassuming tunnel that descended at a steeper angle than the others. Unlike the primary pathways, this passage bore no practical mining marks, no evidence of ore extraction or transport infrastructure. Instead, its walls were covered with intricate carvings depicting dwarves in various poses of reverence, their hands raised towards stylized representations of crystals and stone formation. "It's like a temple tunnel," Airtrade observed, tracing one of the carvings with his fingertips. "Sacred rather than practical." The passage wound downward in a gradual spiral, the air growing noticeably warmer as they descended. After several minutes, they began to hear a new sound, a low, constant hum that seemed to vibrate through the stone itself, felt as much as heard. The sound carried no discernible melody, yet somehow suggested the foundation upon which all music might be built. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a perfectly circular chamber, smaller than the main workshop above, but more carefully constructed. The walls had been smoothed to an almost polished finish, and the floor featured an intricate mosaic depicting an enormous tree. Not Yggdrasil, but something more abstract, its roots extending from a central point to reach toward the chamber's perimeter. At the center of this room, suspended within a delicate framework of metal and crystal, hovered what could only be the Heartstone. A formation roughly the size of Kratos' fist, neither truly transparent nor opaque, but shifting between states. Its color impossible to define as it seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. "There it is," Atreus whispered, approaching slowly with the reverence one might show a sleeping being. The journal said it contains all the songs of the mountain's history. The heartstone pulsed gently, its rhythm matching exactly the beat they had followed from the entrance, the heartbeat of the mountain. As they drew closer, the hum intensified, becoming rich with overtones and harmonics that suggested countless melodies interwoven into a single complex tapestry of sound. Atreus looked to his father, silently seeking permission to approach more closely. After a moment's assessment, Kratos nodded, though he moved to stand beside his son, ready to intervene if necessary. With careful movements, Atreus extended his hands toward the hovering stone, not quite touching it, but allowing his palms to rest within inches of its shifting surface. Immediately, the hum resolved into distinct voices, hundreds of them, singing in layered harmony. Unlike the individual crystal memories they had encountered above, this chorus contained all songs simultaneously, each maintaining its unique character while contributing to the greater whole. Tra closed his eyes, his expression reflecting intense concentration as he attempted to disentangle the countless narratives contained within the sound. "I can hear everything," he said softly. "Their arrivals, discoveries, celebrations. There's so much." Kratos watched closely, alert for any sign that the experience might overwhelm his son. Yet Atreus showed no distress, only deep fascination and growing understanding as he listened to the mountain's accumulated memories. "There was a collapse," the boy said suddenly, his voice taking on a somber tone. "In the eastern tunnels. The mountain gave warnings, but they were mining something valuable, something that sang with unusual power. They ignored the disharmony in the Earth's song, and..." He swallowed hard. "Many died. The survivors performed funeral rites and then they left, abandoned the mine out of respect for those lost." He lowered his hands, stepping back from the heartstone as its chorus gradually returned to the more abstract hum they had initially heard. "That's why everything looks like they just walked away. They did. As a memorial. Left their tools and personal belongings as offerings to honor the dead." Kratos nodded, understanding this warrior's respect for fallen comrades. A worthy tribute. They stood in silence for several moments, absorbing the weight of what they had discovered. The abandoned mine was not merely a historical curiosity, but a sacred site. A place where lives had been lost and remembered through the deliberate preservation of their final work. "Do you think we're the first to find this place since they left?" Atreus asked eventually. "Perhaps," Kratos replied, "though few secrets remain truly undiscovered in these realms." Atreus opened the journal again, turning to its final pages. The last entry mentioned sealing the entrance with runework that would make it invisible to all but those who knew to look for it. He glanced up at his father. "Maybe that's why we found it. Because we weren't actually looking. We just happened to be in the right place." This suggestion carried implications about fate and coincidence that Kratos preferred not to examine too closely. Instead, he gestured toward the passage leading upward. "We should return to the surface before darkness falls." As they prepared to leave, Atreus hesitated, looking back at the heartstone with obvious reluctance. "It feels wrong to just leave it here, unknown. All these stories, all this knowledge about how the dwarves worked with the earth. Not all discoveries are ours to claim or share," Kratos reminded him. "Some must remain where they lie, respected but undisturbed." The boy nodded slowly, accepting this wisdom despite his natural inclination towards sharing new knowledge. Could we at least tell Brock and Sindri? They're dwarves. This is part of their heritage. Kratos considered this request, weighing respect for the dead against the potential value of preserved knowledge. We will tell them of its existence, he decided finally. They may choose whether to visit themselves. This compromise satisfied Atreus, who took one last look around the chamber before following his father back up the winding passage. As they ascended, the Heartstone's hum gradually faded behind them, though its rhythms seemed to linger in their awareness, subtly influencing their perception of the surrounding stone. Returning through the main workshop, they moved with increased understanding of the space. Not just an abandoned mine, but a community that had lived in harmony with the mountain, listening to its songs and translating its wisdom into practical knowledge. What had initially appeared as simple tools now revealed themselves as instruments of both utility and communication, the means by which generations of dwarving miners had maintained their sacred connection to the earth. As they approached the entrance tunnel, Atreus paused beside one of the larger crystals they had examined earlier. With gentle respect, he placed his palm against its surface, awakening the memory contained within. A simple working song with repetitive verses that might have accompanied hours of steady labor. "I'd like to learn some of these songs," he said, as the crystal's melody filled the chamber. Not just to translate, but to actually sing them, to keep them alive somehow. Kratos, who typically maintained emotional distance from such sentiments, found himself unexpectedly receptive to this impulse. The dwarves would likely approve of their traditions continuing through new voices. Encouraged by this unusual support, Atreus listened intently to the melody, committing its patterns to memory as it cycled through several repetitions. When the crystal's song finally faded, he attempted to reproduce it, his young voice offering a somewhat higher-pitched but recognizable version of the dwarven mining chant. The effect was immediate and surprising. As Atreus sang, several crystals throughout the chamber began to glow faintly, responding to the human voice as they had once answered their dwarven creators. The boy continued, growing more confident with each phrase, and the illumination spread gradually until the entire workshop was bathed in soft blue-tinged light. When he finally fell silent, the glow persisted for several seconds before slowly fading, leaving them once again in the orange flicker of their torch. The expression on Atreus's face combined wonder and satisfaction, the joy of connection across centuries through the universal language of music. "The mountain remembers," he said softly. They exited the mine as afternoon light began to wane toward evening, emerging onto the mountainside where their hunt had been interrupted hours earlier. The ordinary world of trees, rocks, and sky seemed somehow changed after their time beneath the earth. Not physically altered, but perceived differently, with greater awareness of the complex systems operating beneath visible surfaces. As they began their journey homeward, Atreus occasionally hummed fragments of the dwarven songs, testing his memory and cementing the patterns in his mind. Atreus, while maintaining his usual stoic demeanor, found the melodies settling into his awareness as well, their rhythms subtly influencing his breathing and the cadence of his steps. "Do you think other mountains have songs too?" Atreus asked as they descended through a stand of pine trees, their needled branches sighing in the gentle evening breeze. "All things have their own nature," Kratos replied after a thoughtful pause. Whether that nature expresses itself as song depends on one's ability to listen. This philosophical observation, unusual for his typically taciturn father, clearly delighted Atreus. Mother used to say something similar, that understanding comes not from looking harder, but from learning to see differently. Kratos nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in Faye's teaching. Your mother recognized patterns others overlooked. They continued in companionable silence for some time, following a game trail that wound down the mountain's western slope. As twilight deepened around them, Atreus returned to humming one of the dwarven melodies, a slower, more contemplative piece that seemed appropriate for the day's end. To his surprise, Kratos began to provide a rhythmic counterpoint, using the steady sound of his footfalls and the occasional tap of his axe handle against his palm to create a simple percussion that complemented the boy's melody. Though far from elaborate, this unexpected musical collaboration represented a rare moment of shared expression beyond their usual practical communications. Atreus smiled, but made no comment, intuitively understanding that drawing attention to this unusual behavior might cause his father to withdraw from it. Instead, he simply continued his song, occasionally adjusting his tempo or tone to better blend with Kratos' rhythm. As night settled fully across the land, they made camp beneath a rocky overhang that provided shelter from the increasing breeze. A small fire cast flickering light across their temporary haven as they consumed a simple meal of dried meat and berries, their hunt having been diverted to a different kind of discovery. I've been thinking about what we found, Atreus said as they finished eating, about how the dwarves used music not just for enjoyment, but as a tool, a way to understand the mountain and work with it rather than against it. Kratos regarded his son across the fire, noting the thoughtful expression that often preceded some new insight. And what conclusion have you reached? Maybe that's how we should approach our journey too, Atreus suggested. Not just overcoming obstacles through force, but listening for the rhythm of what's happening around us, finding ways to move with it rather than always fighting against it. This observation carried wisdom beyond the boy's years, a perspective that acknowledged strength while recognizing its limitations. Kratos, whose long existence had been defined largely by opposition and conflict, found himself considering how differently certain past challenges might have unfolded had he approached them with this mindset. There is merit in your thinking, he acknowledged, stoking the fire with a small branch. Though some forces in this world respond only to direct confrontation. I know, Atreus agreed, but maybe we can be better at recognizing which ones those are, instead of treating everything as an enemy to be defeated. They lapsed into contemplative silence, each reflecting on the implications of this philosophy for their ongoing journey. The fire crackled softly, its dancing flames creating shadows that moved across the rock face behind them, like visual echoes of the dwarven songs they had discovered. Before settling into his sleeping furs, Atreus removed the journal from his pack, carefully opening it to study the diagrams and notations by firelight. Though he couldn't hope to memorize its entire contents in one evening, he was determined to preserve what knowledge he could, both for practical application and out of respect for those who had created it. "Father," he said after several minutes of study, "there's a section here about how the dwarves used resonance to strengthen their crafting, how certain metals respond to specific tones that align with their inner nature." He looked up from the page. "Do you think that's how Broke and Sindri do some of their work?" using sound as part of their forging process? Kratos considered this question. I have heard them humming or chanting during certain procedures. Perhaps this is not merely habit, but technique. We should ask them, Atreus said, returning to the journal with renewed interest. Maybe this knowledge isn't completely lost, just not spoken about openly. As the boy continued his study, Kratos maintained watch, his senses attuned to their surroundings with the habitual vigilance of a warrior who has survived countless dangers. Yet his thoughts remained with the dwarven mine and its singing stones, a place where craft and communion had merged into something beyond mere resource extraction. Eventually, Atreus's exploration of the journal slowed as fatigue began to claim him. He carefully closed the volume and returned it to his pack before settling into his furs beside the fire. Good night, father, he murmured, his voice already heavy with approaching sleep. Rest well, Kratos replied, adding another branch to the fire to maintain its warmth through the night's coldest hours. As Atreus drifted towards sleep, he began to hum softly, not consciously, but as if the dwarven melodies had become so thoroughly integrated into his thinking that they now expressed themselves even in his semi-conscious state. The simple tune rose and fell like gentle waves, creating a soothing rhythm that seemed to blend with the night sounds around them. Kratos found himself listening not just to his son's humming, but to the larger symphony of their environment, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant call of a night bird, the subtle creaking of branches adjusting to the cooling air. Each sound existed independently, yet contributed to a greater whole, much like the layered voices they had heard in the Hearthstone's chorus. For a moment, brief but significant, he perceived the world as the dwarven miners might have, not as a collection of separate elements to be conquered or defended against, but as an interconnected system expressing itself through countless voices that, when properly understood, revealed pathways rather than obstacles. This perspective, so different from his usual stance of vigilant opposition, offered a glimpse of alternatives, approaches to existence that relied on harmony rather than domination, on listening rather than imposing. While he doubted his capacity to fully adopt such methods after centuries of conditioning toward conflict, the mere recognition of their possibility represented a subtle but meaningful shift in his understanding. Beside him, Atreus's humming gradually faded as sleep claimed him completely. The boy's features relaxed into peaceful rest, unburdened for these hours by the complexities of their journey and the uncertainties that awaited them. In sleep, at least, he could dwell within the simple beauty of the dwarven songs, rather than considering their implications for the challenges ahead. Kratos maintained his watch through the deepening night, occasionally adding fuel to their small fire when its warmth diminished. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, their ancient light filtering through tree branches to create patterns of shadow and illumination across their campsite. In this quiet solitude, he found the dwarven melodies returning to his thoughts, not with the crystal clarity experienced within the mine, but as remembered fragments that wove themselves into his awareness of the surrounding darkness. There was wisdom in what they had discovered today, not the transient knowledge of specific techniques or particular resources, but deeper understanding about relationships between beings and their environment, between intention and manifestation, between individual effort and collective harmony. These insights carried potential value for their journey that extended beyond mere curiosity about dwarven history. As dawn's first light began to soften the eastern horizon, Kratos allowed himself a rare moment of anticipation, not for battle or challenge, but for his son's awakening and the conversations that would surely follow. Kratos would have questions, observations, connections to explore between what they had learned and what lay ahead. From these exchanges might emerge new approaches to their shared path, strategies informed by the singing stones and their ancient wisdom. The mountain had shared its songs with them. Now they would determine how to carry that harmony forward, integrating its lessons into their continuing journey through realms where discord too often dominated. In this integration lay possibility, not for avoiding conflict entirely, but perhaps for engaging it with greater awareness of underlying patterns and potential resolutions that force alone might never reveal. As the new day's light strengthened, Kratos found himself humming one of the dwarven working songs, softly, almost unconsciously, its rhythm matching his breathing as he prepared for their journey to resume. The melody carried no magic beyond the simple power of connection to the earth, to heritage, to the countless beings who had found their own paths through existence's complexities. In this moment of quiet reflection, something aligned within him, not transforming his fundamental nature, but offering a glimpse of alternative perspectives, of paths not previously considered. The journey ahead remained challenging, its ultimate destination uncertain, but the songs of the dwarven miners had added new instruments to their navigational tools, ways of listening that might reveal openings where before they had perceived only obstacles. When Atreus finally stirred, roused by the growing light and the morning calls of birds reclaiming their territories, he found his father already awake, their small camp organized for efficient departure. The boy sat up, blinking away sleep's final vestiges, and immediately reached for his pack to check that the dwarven journal remained secure. "We should reach the cabin by midday," Kratos informed him, extinguishing the fire's last embers with careful efficiency. Atreus nodded, gathering his belongings while humming one of the mining songs, this time consciously, testing his memory of its specific patterns after hours of sleep. To his satisfaction, the melody remained clear in his mind, its rhythms and tonal shifts preserved, as if he had been singing it for years rather than learning it only the previous day. "The song stayed with me," he commented as they prepared to depart. "I dreamed about the mine, about dwarves working in harmony with the mountain, their tools and voices creating patterns that revealed where to dig, where to reinforce, where to leave undisturbed." Kratos secured his axe at his side, his movements practiced and precise. Dreams often clarify what waking minds struggle to comprehend. They set out as the sun cleared the eastern ridges, its light transforming the landscape from shadowed mystery to revealed detail. Their path would take them down through foothills and across valleys now familiar from previous journeys, territory known and generally predictable, unlike the unexpected discovery that had altered yesterday's hunt. Yet as they traveled, both father and son found themselves perceiving their surroundings with subtly enhanced awareness, not just assessing terrain for tactical advantage or potential threats, but noting patterns of growth and decay, of water flow and erosion, of life establishing itself in seemingly inhospitable niches. The dwarven perspective had influenced their perception, revealing layers of information previously overlooked or deemed irrelevant. "Listen," Atreus said suddenly, pausing beside a tumble of rocks where a small spring emerged from between granite slabs. "The water has a song too." Kratos stopped, allowing his senses to focus on the sound, not merely registering it as background noise but attending to its specific qualities. The spring's voice combined multiple elements: the deeper tones of water moving through subterranean channels, the brighter notes of its emergence into daylight, the varied percussion of droplets striking stone surfaces at different distances and angles. Each place has its own melody, Atreus continued, clearly delighted by this observation. The dwarves didn't invent the songs. They just learned to hear what was already there, and then to work with it instead of against it. This insight resonated with philosophical depth that belied the boy's youth, an understanding not merely of technique, but of underlying principles that might apply across countless situations. Kratos recognized its potential value, filing it alongside other wisdom accumulated throughout his long existence. Such awareness has practical applications, he acknowledged as they resumed their journey. Knowing the natural patterns of a place reveals both its vulnerabilities and its strengths. They continued through morning light that strengthened toward midday brilliance, occasionally pausing to listen when some particularly interesting sound caught their attention. A woodpecker's rhythmic drumming, the complex rustle of wind moving through different types of foliage, the distant rush of a waterfall hidden beyond the next ridge. Each sound formed part of the landscape's ongoing composition, neither random nor rigidly structured, but organized according to principles only partially comprehensible to human understanding. As they descended from the foothills into more heavily forested terrain, Atreus began to experiment, humming fragments of dwarven melodies and observing how these sounds interacted with their environment. In some locations, certain tones seemed to carry further or resonate more clearly. In others, they were quickly absorbed or distorted by the surrounding vegetation and terrain. "I wonder if we could use these patterns for communication," he suggested, testing a particularly resonant passage between two rock formations. Different songs for different messages, chosen to match the specific environment we're moving through. Kratos considered this practical application. An unconventional signal system might confound enemies accustomed to listening for more common communications. This potential tactical advantage appealed to his warrior's instincts, transforming what might have remained merely philosophical curiosity into practical methodology. Perhaps there was direct utility in these dwarven approaches, beyond their historical or cultural significance. Tools and techniques adaptable to their current challenges. By midday, as Kratos had predicted, they came within sight of their cabin. The simple structure nestled against ancient trees, partly concealed by natural features and the protective enchantments Fae had established years earlier. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, straight column, indicating calm air and continued function of the heating arrangements they had left in place before their departure. As they approached their home, Atreus' pace quickened slightly, not from urgent need, but from the natural desire to share their discovery with others who might appreciate its significance. "I can't wait to tell Mimir about the singing stones," he said. "He probably knows stories about dwarven mining techniques that could help us understand what we found." Kratos nodded, acknowledging the value of consulting the well-traveled head's extensive knowledge. Though he maintained habitual caution regarding magical artifacts and ancient sites, he recognized that proper understanding often required multiple perspectives, particularly when dealing with cultures and traditions outside his direct experience. They crossed the final distance to their dwelling, returning from what had begun as a simple hunting expedition, with no material gains, but considerable intellectual and philosophical harvest. The knowledge they carried of dwarven mining songs, of the Heartstone's accumulated memories, of approaches to existence based on harmony rather than opposition, represented wealth of a different kind than meat for their table or hides for their winter gear. In the quiet of their forest home, they would have opportunity to reflect on these discoveries, to discuss their implications with Mimir's scholarly input, perhaps eventually to share them with Brock and Sindri when next they encountered the Dwarven brothers. From these conversations might emerge a new understanding, not just of past practices, but of future possibilities, of approaches to their journey not previously considered. The songs of the Dwarven miners had entered their awareness, adding new dimensions to their perception of the world around them. Whether these melodies would significantly alter their path remained to be seen, but they had undeniably expanded the range of available perspectives, offering alternatives to consider when challenges arose. As they reached their cabin's threshold, Atreus paused to look back toward the mountains where they had made their unexpected discovery. The peaks stood silhouetted against the midday sky, revealing nothing of the complex network of tunnels and chambers hidden within their stone facades. Yet now he knew something of their inner voice, the rhythms and harmonies that had guided generations of Dwarven miners in their work beneath the surface. "We'll go back someday," he said, not as question, but as quiet certainty, to learn more of their songs. Kratos, following his son's gaze toward the distant heights, offered no contradiction to this prediction. Some discoveries, once made, continued to exert influence long after the initial encounter, drawing consciousness back for deeper exploration, for further understanding, for renewed connection with wisdom temporarily forgotten but never truly lost. The mountain and its songs would remain patient, enduring, their melodies preserved in crystal memory until the next listeners arrived to awaken them. And when that time came, perhaps the Dwarven miners' ancient knowledge would reveal new harmonies, new patterns, new pathways through the challenges that awaited them on their continuing journey. For now they had returned home, carrying not physical treasures but something potentially more valuable, perspectives that expanded their understanding of how to move through a world filled with both opposition and opportunity, with conflicts that demanded strength, but also with patterns that rewarded attention, with discord that sometimes required confrontation, but also with harmonies that offered alternative resolutions. In this expanded awareness lay possibility, not for avoiding difficulties entirely, but for approaching them with greater comprehension of underlying principles and potential responses. The songs of the Dwarven miners had added new instruments to their navigational tools, new voices to their understanding of existence's complex symphony. As they entered their cabin, the memory of those songs accompanied them, not merely as pleasant melodies or interesting historical artifacts, but as living wisdom with continuing relevance to their journey. In the days ahead, they would determine how best to integrate this knowledge into their path forward, how to honor its insights while adapting its applications to their specific circumstances. The mountain had shared its songs. Now they would carry that harmony into whatever awaited them beyond the next horizon. In the days that followed their discovery of the Dwarven mining colony, Atreus often found himself humming the miners' songs as he went about his daily tasks. The melodies had taken root in his mind, becoming as familiar as the forest paths surrounding their cabin. Even Kratos, though he would not admit it openly, occasionally caught himself tapping rhythms against his axe handle that matched the ancient Dwarven working chants. The knowledge they had gained of how the miners had used music to communicate with the mountain itself continued to influence how they perceived the world around them, sounds that might once have registered merely as background noise. now revealed patterns and information. The different tones of wind through various trees, indicating weather changes. The subtle variations in stream currents, suggesting what might lie upstream. The distinctive echoes of certain rock formations, offering clues about their composition. It was during one of their hunting expeditions, nearly a fortnight after their visit to the mining colony, that Atreus noticed something unusual in the rhythm of his father's footsteps as they crossed a particular stretch of forest floor. "Wait," he said, pausing to listen more carefully. "Do you hear that?" Kratos stopped, his senses immediately alert for potential threats. "Hear what?" "The sound when you walk here," Atreus replied, stamping his foot gently against the ground. "It's different, hollow somehow." With characteristic thoroughness, Kratos tested the observation, moving deliberately across the area in question. Indeed, the earth returned a subtly different tone here, not immediately obvious but unmistakable once attention was drawn to it. The sound suggested some space beneath the forest floor, concealed by roots and generations of fallen leaves. "There's something under here," Atroci concluded, already kneeling to investigate, fingers probing through the thick carpet of decomposing vegetation. What they would discover beneath that unassuming patch of forest floor, the ancient, hidden entrance to what dwarven legends called the Forgotten Forge, would lead them on yet another journey of discovery. But that is a tale for another twilight, another quiet evening beside the fire, when sleep beckons and dreams await just beyond consciousness. Snow drifted lazily from the slate-grey sky as Kratos and Atreus made their way through the dense forest that covered the northern slopes of the mountain range. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid air, dissipating into the stillness around them. Though the forest was quiet, it was far from empty. The subtle rustle of creatures moving through underbrush, the distant call of ravens, and the occasional creak of snow-laden branches all painted the acoustic landscape of their journey. "How much farther to this forge?" Kratos asked, his deep voice barely disturbing the tranquil atmosphere. His heavy footfalls left deep impressions in the snow, while Aphris moved with the lighter step of youth, barely marking the white blanket beneath them. The boy consulted the crude map Brock had sketched for them, his brow furrowed in concentration. "According to Brock, we should find the entrance near the base of the twin waterfalls. He said we can't miss it. A stone archway, carved with dwarven runes." Kratos grunted, his golden eyes scanning the terrain ahead. Though he rarely admitted it, he had come to respect the Blue Dwarf's knowledge, particularly when it concerned the crafting traditions of his people. If Brock claimed this forgotten forge held significance, it was likely worth investigating. Mimir spoke up from his position at Kratos' bout. "The Whispering Forge is more than just another dwarven workshop, brother. Legend holds it was the first forge blessed by the ancient dwarven gods, before even Odin's rise to prominence. The fires there were said to burn with knowledge as much as heat." "And you believe these fires still burn after all this time?" Kratos asked, skepticism evident in his tone. He had witnessed too many legends prove hollow upon closer examination to accept such claims without question. "Well, not burn exactly," Mimir clarified. "More like smolder. Dwarven forge fires are unlike ordinary flames. Once properly sanctified, they never fully die, merely fall dormant, until awakened by those with proper knowledge and intention." Atreus perked up at this, his natural curiosity engaged. "Like the eternal flames in the stories Mother used to tell? The ones that couldn't be extinguished by wind or water?" "They're similar in principle, though distinct in application," Mimir confirmed. Your mother's stories likely reference the eternal flame of Muspelheim, which exists independent of fuel or tending. Dwarven forge fires, by contrast, maintain connection to their creators through complex enchantments, persisting as long as the knowledge they embody remains relevant. Their path began to descend into a narrow ravine where ancient pines grew so tall they seemed to touch the low-hanging clouds. The sound of rushing water gradually became audible, first as distant whisper, then growing to persistent murmur that suggested they approached their destination. "Listen," Atreus said, pausing briefly. "I can hear the waterfalls." They followed the increasingly pronounced sound until the forest opened suddenly onto a breathtaking vista. Twin waterfalls cascading side by side down a sheer rock face perhaps 200 feet high. The water, partially frozen along its edges, thundered into a deep pool below, sending fine mist into the air that created dancing rainbows where sparse sunlight penetrated the cloud cover. "It's beautiful," Atreus breathed, momentarily forgetting their purpose in simple appreciation of natural wonder. Kratos surveyed the area with more practical assessment, seeking the entrance Brock had described. His experienced eyes noted how the cliff face between the waterfalls bore subtle marks of deliberate shaping, not immediately obvious to casual observation, but unmistakable to one familiar with constructed stonework. "There," he indicated with slight nod, "behind the water curtain." Atreus followed his father's gaze, squinting to discern what had caught his attention. Gradually, he perceived what Kratos had immediately recognized: an arched opening, partially concealed by the leftmost waterfall's flowing veil. Ancient dwarven runes were carved into the stone surrounding this entrance, their edges softened by centuries of water exposure, but still legible to those with knowledge of such scripts. "Can you read the inscription?" Kratos asked his son, acknowledging the boy's growing facility with various runic languages. Atreus approached as close as possible without being drenched by the waterfall's spray, studying the weathered markings with narrowed eyes. "Parts of it," he answered after careful consideration. "It's an older dialect than what Brock and Sindri use, but I recognize elements. Something about knowledge in flame and wisdom forged in silence. And a warning. Only those with purpose may enter, all others will find only cold stone." "Typical dwarven cryptic nonsense," Mimir commented with a chuckle. "They do love their riddles and conditions. But there's practical purpose behind such warnings. Many dwarven sites incorporate enchantments that reveal their true nature only to those approaching with specific intent or knowledge." Kratos considered this information with characteristic practicality. "Our purpose is clear: to investigate this forge and its supposedly special fire." He adjusted the axe on his back and moved toward the concealed entrance with decisive strides. As they approached the water curtain, a curious phenomenon occurred. The flow seemed to part slightly, creating dry passage just wide enough for them to enter without becoming drenched. This subtle manipulation suggested active enchantment still functioned despite the forge's apparent abandonment. Beyond the waterfall lay a short natural tunnel that quickly gave way to clearly worked stone. Smooth walls bearing extensive runic inscriptions and elaborate reliefs depicting dwarfen crafting scenes. Illumination came from veins of some golden mineral embedded in the rock itself, providing soft, ambient light that required no maintenance, yet had apparently persisted for centuries. "Look at these carvings," Atreus said, voice hushed with appreciation as they proceeded deeper. "They're telling stories of the first dwarven smiths. The tunnel opened unexpectedly into a vast cavern that drew involuntary sounds of wonder from both travelers. The ceiling soared perhaps 50 feet above, supported by massive natural stone columns that had been enhanced with intricate carvings. The walls displayed elaborate murals depicting dwarven figures working alongside larger, more imposing forms that appeared to be their gods. Beings of immense proportion, yet shown teaching rather than commanding, guiding hands rather than issuing edicts. Throughout the cavern, golden veins like those in the entrance tunnel provided gentle illumination, casting long shadows while revealing astonishing attention to detail in the space's construction. What might have been a purely functional workshop had been transformed through exceptional craftsmanship into testament to dwarven reverence for their art. At the chamber's center stood the forge itself, a massive stone structure built around what appeared to be natural fissure in the mountain's heart. Rather than the robust flames one might expect in working forge, only faint reddish glow emanated from its depths, barely illuminating the elaborate tools arranged precisely on nearby workbenches. Ancient anvils of various sizes stood positioned for different types of work, each bearing marks of extensive use, yet maintained with evident care. "It's magnificent," Mimir observed as they approached the forge's heart. Few living eyes have beheld this place since the dwarven schism that drove most of their kind into specialized enclaves. This represents their unified tradition, before divisions between armorsmiths and weapon crafters, between enchantment specialists and material purists. Kratos studied the arrangement with practiced assessment, noting practical efficiencies in the workflow design that suggested minds deeply versed in their craft had planned every aspect of the space. Despite his typical stoicism, he could appreciate the excellence evident in such purposeful construction. "The forge fire has diminished significantly," he observed, examining the barely glowing embers visible in the forge's heart, as expected after centuries without tending. Atreus moved closer to the forge, drawn by curiosity. "It's still warm, though," he noted, extending his hands toward the gentle heat still radiating from the ancient structure. "And look, there are inscriptions around the edge. Instructions, maybe?" The boy crouched to study the runes encircling the forge's perimeter, his fingers occasionally tracing particularly complex symbols as he worked to decipher their meaning. "It says something about feeding the knowledge flame with purpose and memory, and speaking truth to embers." Amir's wooden features showed as much excitement as they were capable of displaying. A traditional dwarven forge awakening ritual. They believed their forge fires responded to sincere intention, an authentic purpose, unlike the Aesir who demand worship and sacrifice. Dwarven gods sought honest engagement with craft itself, the pure desire to create with excellence. "So we need to talk to the fire?" Atrial asked, skepticism evident despite his general openness to magical concepts. "Not exactly," Mimir clarified. "More like demonstrating genuine purpose through both word and action. The forge needs to understand, in its way, what you intend to create and why. Dwarven craft tradition holds that purpose influences outcome as much as technique. Identical processes with different intentions yield distinctly different results." Kratos approached the forge with measured steps, studying its construction with experienced eyes. Though he rarely spoke of it, he had extensive knowledge of forge work from his earlier life, not merely as warrior who used weapons, but as one who had observed master craftsmen create implements of both beauty and deadly efficiency. "We need proper fuel," he observed, noting several containers of what appeared to be specialized forge materials positioned nearby. Materials preserved through dwarven enchantment despite centuries of abandonment. With practiced efficiency, he selected appropriate components and began preparing them for use, his massive hands moving with surprising delicacy as he arranged them according to patterns suggested by the forge's own design. Atreus watched with interest, always eager to learn from his father's demonstrations of unexpected knowledge. "I didn't know you knew about forge work," he commented, helping gather the necessary materials as directed. Kratos continued his preparations without looking up. In Sparta, warriors understood their weapons, not just how to use them, but how they were made. A blade's strengths and weaknesses begin in the forge. He paused briefly, memories momentarily visible in his eyes before his typical smithsism reasserted itself. "I observed many skilled smiths. As they worked to prepare the forge, the chamber around them seemed to respond subtly to their actions, the golden veins in the walls brightening slightly, shadows shifting in ways not entirely explained by their movements. The air grew noticeably warmer, carrying scents of hot metal and ancient wood that seemed to emerge from the stone itself, rather than from any physical source. The place awakens," Mimi observed quietly, responding to purposeful presence after long dormancy. Dwarven constructions often incorporate such awareness, not consciousness as we understand it, but responsive enchantment, attuned to specific activities and intentions. Following what appeared to be intuitive understanding of the process, Kratos arranged the prepared materials around the forge's core, where faint embers still glowed with subdued vitality. His movements displayed respect for the craft that transcended his typical impatience with ritual, recognition that proper process served practical purpose rather than merely satisfying tradition. "Now, we need to state our purpose," Mimir instructed as the preparations neared completion. "The forge must understand why its power is being sought. Dwarven tradition places great emphasis on the relationship between creator and creation. Tools should know why they come into being." Kratos straightened to his full height beside the forge, golden eyes reflecting the subtle glow from its depths. "We seek knowledge," he stated, his deep voice resonating through the chamber with surprising impact. "Understanding of craft and creation. Not weapons for conquest, but wisdom for protection." The simplicity of this declaration carried weight that more elaborate speech might have lacked, honesty evident in every syllable. This was not diplomatic manipulation, but straightforward statement of intent, characteristic of the man, but also perfectly aligned with dwarven values that prized directness over flowery artifice. For several moments nothing happened beyond subtle brightening of the ember glow. Then, with sudden intensity that caused Octavius to step back in surprise, the forge's fire surged upward, not as destructive conflagration, but as controlled, purposeful flame that cast warm, golden light throughout the chamber. The fire moved with almost liquid quality, flowing rather than flickering, its color shifting between deep orange and bright gold as it stabilized at perfect working height. "It accepted our purpose," Atreus whispered, watching the beautiful display with wide-eyed wonder. Around them, the entire chamber responded to the forge's awakening, the golden veins in the walls pulsing with increased luminosity, casting light on murals that now seemed to move subtly. figures within the carved scenes shifting position when viewed peripherally. Tools on nearby workbenches emitted faint ringing sounds, like distant wind chimes responding to unfelt breeze. Most notably, the atmosphere itself changed, becoming thick with presence that suggested they were no longer alone. Not threatening presence, but attentive observation, as if awakening the forge had simultaneously roused awareness that had slumbered alongside it for centuries. "We have an audience," Mimir noted quietly. "The forge's guardians. Echoes of those who established this place, who embedded their knowledge within its very stones. Not fully present in our reality, but certainly paying attention to their unexpected visitors." Kratos remained outwardly unaffected by these developments, his focus remaining on the practical aspects of the now awakened forge. With experienced assessment, he studied the fire's quality, the tool's arrangement, the overall state of the workspace that had suddenly transformed from historical relic to potentially functional crafting station. "The fire burns properly," he observed, satisfaction evident despite his typically sparse praise. "Clean heat without smoke, ideal for precision work." Atreus, less restrained in his reactions, moved around the chamber with evident wonder, studying the murals that had gained new vibrancy in the forge's improved light. "The stories are clearer now," he noted, observing details previously obscured by shadow. "They show the dwarven gods teaching their people, not just how to make things, but why creation matters." Indeed, the newly illuminated murals revealed narratives more complex than mere crafting instruction. They depicted relationships between teachers and students that emphasized knowledge transfer as sacred trust rather than mere technical instruction. The larger figures, clearly the dwarven deities, were shown guiding hands, demonstrating techniques, but also pointing to hearts and heads, suggesting wisdom beyond mere skill. As Atreus continued exploring the chamber's periphery, Kratos remained near the forge, experiencing subtle pull that suggested the flame itself invited closer interaction. With cautious respect, he extended his hands toward the fire, not touching it directly, but feeling its unique quality of heat that warmed without burning, that invited rather than threatened. "An unusual flame," he commented, studying its behavior with experienced assessment. "It responds to intention." To demonstrate this observation, he focused his thoughts on specific crafting needs. A blade requiring particular temper, armor needing specific flexibility, and watched as the forge fire shifted slightly in response, adapting its nature to accommodate these unspoken requirements. The flame possessed intelligence beyond ordinary fire, not consciousness exactly, but purpose-oriented adaptation that transcended natural behavior. "Remarkable," Mimir breathed, observing these interactions from his position. The legend spoke truly. This fire contains knowledge itself, the accumulated wisdom of generations of master crafters, preserved through dwarven enchantment and bound to the forge's physical structure. The disembodied head's scholarly excitement was interrupted by Atreus' call from across the chamber, where the boy had discovered something significant. "Father, look at this wall. It's different from the others." Kratos joined his son before a section of wall that indeed differed noticeably from surrounding areas. While most of the chamber featured narrative murals or practical workspace, this particular segment displayed what appeared to be instructional diagrams, detailed illustrations of specific crafting techniques accompanied by extensive runic annotations. "Craft secrets," Mimi identified with evident appreciation. "The dwarves' most closely guarded knowledge, typically passed only from master to apprentice through direct demonstration. To record such information permanently was extremely rare, considered dangerous by many traditionalists who feared their arts might be appropriated by unworthy practitioners. Atreus studied these diagrams with focused attention, his growing facility with runic languages allowing partial comprehension despite the specialized terminology. They're showing how to bind elements that normally wouldn't work together, he observed, tracing particular sequences with careful fingers. How to merge properties that usually conflict. The foundations of dwarven enchantment, Mimir confirmed. Their most revolutionary contribution to crafting traditions across the realms. Techniques for creating harmony between naturally antagonistic materials or properties. This knowledge fundamentally transformed what could be achieved through crafting. Kratos examined these instructional displays with practical assessment, his experienced eye recognizing applications that transcended mere theoretical interest. These techniques offered solutions to crafting challenges he had observed throughout his extensive existence, ways to overcome limitations that had constrained even the most skilled smiths he had encountered. Useful knowledge, he acknowledged, his typical terseness underscoring rather than diminishing the significance of this evaluation. From a man of few words, this represented high praise indeed. As they studied these revelations, the forge fire continued its gentle, purposeful burning, neither diminishing nor increasing, but maintaining perfect working temperature, while occasionally shifting color in apparent response to their discussions. The chamber's ambient sounds had evolved as well, subtle metallic tones suggesting distant hammering, soft whispers like craftsmen sharing insights, creating acoustic texture that enhanced rather than distracted from their exploration. Atreus returned to the forge after completing initial survey of the instructional wall, drawn by the flame's hypnotic movement and the comfortable warmth it radiated throughout the chamber. As he watched the fires dance, he noticed how shadows cast by nearby tools created patterns across the workspace. Not random projections, but what appeared to be deliberate displays, like visual instructions being offered through indirect means. The forge is showing us something, he observed, indicating how shadows aligned to highlight specific tools in particular arrangements. Black. It's suggesting what we should do next. Kratos joined his son's observation, noting the subtle but unmistakable intentionality behind these shadow patterns. With cautious acceptance of this unusual guidance, he began selecting the indicated tools. Tongs of particular shape, hammers of specific weight, measuring devices of precise configuration. Each selection seemed to satisfy some unspoken requirement, the shadows shifting slightly to highlight subsequent choices once initial recommendations had been followed. It guides our learning, he acknowledged, arranging the selected tools in workspace configurations suggested by the shadow's alignment. Teaching through demonstration rather than words. This approach resonated with Kratos' own preference for practical instruction over theoretical explanation, showing rather than telling, experience over abstraction. Though he maintained healthy skepticism toward anything resembling divine guidance, he recognized effective teaching methodology, regardless of its unusual delivery. With the workspace arranged according to the forge's apparent suggestions, both father and son found themselves standing before the now robust fire, tools prepared but specific purpose still undefined. The atmosphere carried expectant quality, as if the forge awaited their decision about what knowledge they wished to pursue, what creation they hoped to manifest. "What should we make?" Atreus asked, genuine uncertainty in his voice. The forge's power clearly invited significant creation rather than mere practice exercise. Kratos considered this question with characteristic thoroughness, weighing practical needs against educational opportunity. Finally, he reached a decision that balanced both considerations. Something useful but achievable. A hunting knife, complex enough to require attention to detail, simple enough to complete in available time. This practical choice seemed to satisfy the forge's unspoken expectations. The fire shifted color slightly toward cleaner gold, and nearby materials subtly rearranged themselves to highlight specific metal ingots and handle components appropriate for the proposed project. Tools adjusted positions slightly, presenting themselves in sequence that suggested proper workflow for knife creation. "It approves," Mimir observed with scholarly satisfaction, "and prepares to guide the process." Dwarven forges were renowned for their instructional capacity, able to sense practitioners' skill level and adapt teaching accordingly. Even master crafters sometimes discovered new techniques through such interactive guidance. Under the forge's subtle direction, Kratos began the process of crafting, his large hands moving with surprising dexterity as he prepared the selected metal for initial heating. Though he had observed many skilled smiths throughout his extensive existence, he had rarely practiced the craft personally, making this exercise educational for him as well as his son. Atreus participated eagerly, following his father's example while absorbing the forge's unspoken guidance. The shadows continued their instructional dance, highlighting proper techniques and occasionally shifting to suggest corrections when their movement strayed from optimal approach. The process unfolded as a combination of physical craft and interactive learning experience, with the forge itself serving as patient teacher, adapting to their individual capabilities. As they worked the metal through initial stages of knife creation, something extraordinary began to happen. The fire's influence seemed to extend beyond mere physical heating, imparting qualities to the developing blade that transcended ordinary craftsmanship. The metal responded with unusual fluidity, accepting their shaping efforts with resistance appropriate for learning, but without the stubborn intransigence that often frustrated novice crafters. "It guides the material, as well as our hands," Kratos observed, noting how the metal achieved proper temperature and consistency more readily than expected for their relative inexperience, making success possible without removing the necessity for skill development. "Perfect teaching," Mimi commented approvingly. "The forge provides support without replacing personal effort, scaffolding the learning process rather than circumventing it. This balance represents the highest ideal in Dwarven instructional philosophy." As they progressed through successive stages of blade creation, forming, tempering, edge development, both father and son grew increasingly attuned to the forge's subtle guidance. What began as tentative following of Shadow's suggestions evolved into more intuitive engagement, their movements aligning naturally with the workspace's rhythm and the fire's subtle shifts. Throughout this process, the chamber's ambient sounds continued their supportive murmuring, sometimes suggesting approval when techniques were properly executed, occasionally indicating caution when approaches needed adjustment. These auditory cues remained just at perception's threshold, not disturbing concentration but enhancing awareness of their place within larger crafting tradition. The developing knife took shape with surprising quality given their limited experience, not matching Dwarven masterwork, certainly, but far exceeding what novice crafters might typically achieve. The blade displayed proper proportion and balance, the edge developing consistent sharpness, the tang structured appropriately for handle attachment. These accomplishments reflected combination of their sincere effort and the forge's supportive guidance. Neither element sufficient alone, but powerful in combination. As they neared completion of the blade portion, preparing to attach the handle components, Atreus noticed something unusual developing within the metal itself. Subtle patterns emerging along the knife's surface, reminiscent of flowing water or wind currents. These weren't mere discolorations, but seemed to move slightly when viewed from different angles, suggesting depth beyond the metal's physical dimensions. "Father, look," he said, indicating these developing patterns. "The blade has patterns in it. I don't remember making those." Kratos examined the phenomenon with cautious interest, his experienced eye recognizing something beyond ordinary forge effects. "The fire's influence," he concluded after careful assessment. "It imparts more than heat. Essence patterns," Mimir identified with scholarly excitement, one of the most remarkable aspects of traditional dwarven crafting. The forge fire imbues created objects with qualities reflecting both material characteristics and creator's intention, not mere decoration, but functional integration of purpose into physical structure. Indeed, as they continued observing, the patterns became more pronounced, while remaining subtle, not ostentatious ornamentation, but integral aspect of the blade's being. They followed natural stress lines within the metal, reinforcing structural integrity while simultaneously creating visual representation of the knife's intended purpose as practical tool rather than weapon of war. This development added new dimension to their understanding of dwarven crafting philosophy, how function and form were unified through processes that addressed materials' inherent nature rather than imposing entirely external will. The knife was becoming expression of collaborative creation involving metal's properties, forger's guidance, and crafter's intention, each element contributing necessary aspect to harmonious whole. The patterns enhance purpose without requiring additional enchantment, Kratos observed with practical appreciation. Efficient design. As they proceeded to handle attachments, selecting appropriate materials from those highlighted by the forge's subtle guidance, the ambient presence in the chamber seemed to intensify slightly. Not intrusively, but attentively, as if their progress had attracted increased interest from the watching entities, whose existence they perceived primarily through atmospheric changes and occasional whispered encouragements. The handle materials, wood of particular grain and density, binding components of specific flexibility, responded to their touch with unusual cooperation, fitting naturally into configurations that might otherwise require extensive adjustment. The forge fire continued its supportive role, heating components to precisely appropriate temperature for proper joining, without risk of damage or weakness. "They're pleased with our work," Patria noted, sensing the chamber's atmospheric shift. Whatever they are, the guardians, ancestral observers," Mimir clarified. "Echoes of the forge's original keepers, not fully present in conventional sense, but connected to this place through commitments that transcend ordinary mortality. Their approval suggests you're honoring their traditions appropriately." This observation might have unsettled someone with less exposure to unusual metaphysical arrangements, but both Kratos and Atreus had encountered sufficient variety of post-mortal existence to accept such possibilities without excessive concern. What mattered was that these presences appeared benevolent and supportive, rather than threatening. Teachers rather than judges. As they completed the knife's final assembly, both father and son experienced a moment of quiet satisfaction that transcended ordinary accomplishment. The finished tool represented not merely successful crafting exercise, but embodiment of knowledge transfer across generations and cultures. Dwarven wisdom guiding human hands, or mostly human in their case, to create object that honored traditions beyond their own immediate experience. The knife itself exceeded reasonable expectations for their relative inexperience, balanced perfectly for practical use, its edge maintaining consistent sharpness along its length, handle fitted comfortably to hand size and grip preference. The mysterious patterns had stabilized into subtle but distinctive flowing design that seemed almost to move when blade caught light at particular angles. A good knife, Kratos declared with characteristic understatement that nonetheless conveyed genuine approval. He tested the edge with experienced assessment, noting how it cut cleanly without excessive pressure, sign of proper tempering and edge development. Adrius examined their creation with undisguised pride, turning it to catch the forge fire's light from different angles. It feels special. Not just because we made it, but like it has something extra. Something from the forge itself. Indeed it does, Mimir confirmed, his scholarly expertise recognizing qualities beyond merely physical properties. The patterns you observed aren't just decorative. They represent knowledge integration. The forge has embedded certain understandings directly into the blade's structure, teachings that will reveal themselves through use rather than instruction. This idea intrigued both crafters, that their creation might contain wisdom beyond what they had consciously incorporated, that the learning process would continue through the object's practical application rather than ending with its physical completion. Such concept aligned with broader philosophical understanding that true knowledge emerged through lived experience rather than mere theoretical comprehension. With the knife's completion, the forge fire adjusted itself to lower maintenance level burn, not extinguishing but returning to sustainable state that could be maintained indefinitely without constant attention. The chamber's ambient sounds shifted similarly toward quieter rhythm, like conversation transitioning from active exchange to comfortable companionship. The forge returns to rest, Kratos observed, noting these atmospheric changes with practical assessment. Having completed its teaching. Not rest exactly, Mimir corrected gently. More like reduced attentiveness. The fire will maintain its essential nature until needed again, preserving the knowledge it contains while conserving the energies that make such preservation possible. This concept of sustainable preservation rather than complete dormancy suggested thoughtful design focused on longevity rather than immediate impression, characteristic of dwarven approach to creation generally. Their craftsmanship prioritized lasting function over temporary spectacle, enduring usefulness over momentary display. As they began organizing the workspace, returning tools to their proper places, cleaning areas they had utilized, Atreus continued exploring the chamber with curiosity that had not diminished despite their task's completion. His attention returned to the instructional wall they had discovered earlier, studying its detailed diagrams with renewed appreciation after experiencing some of the techniques firsthand. "We should remember this place," he said thoughtfully, committing specific details to memory, while also making quick sketches in the small journal he carried. Not just for the forge, but for everything it teaches about creation. Kratos, typically focused on immediate practical concerns rather than philosophical implications, nonetheless nodded agreement with his son's assessment. The knowledge preserved here transcended mere crafting instruction, offering insights into relationships between intention and outcome, between process and purpose, that applied to many aspects of existence beyond forge work specifically. As they completed their preparations for departure, both father and son experienced reluctance to leave this extraordinary space, not merely because of its physical comfort and aesthetic beauty, but because of the deeper connections they had formed during their time there. The forge had offered not just practical instruction, but sense of participation in traditions extending far beyond their individual experience. "We honor your teaching," Kratos stated, addressing the forge directly as they prepared to depart. The formality of this acknowledgement, unusual for a man typically sparing with words, reflected genuine respect for what they had received. The forge fire seemed to respond to this recognition, briefly intensifying before settling back to steady, sustainable glow that would await future visitors with similar patience. The chamber's ambient sounds offered what might be interpreted as farewell, slightly different tonal quality, suggesting completion rather than interruption. "We appreciate your recognition," Mimir noted quietly. "Few visitors in recent centuries have approached with appropriate respect for what this place represents, seeking power or advantage rather than understanding and continuation of tradition." With final glances around the remarkable chamber, Kratos and Atreus began their journey outward, retracing their path through the carved tunnel toward the waterfall entrance. The golden veins in the stone continued providing gentle illumination, though gradually diminishing as they approached the natural world beyond. The newly crafted knife rested at Atreus's belt, not merely practical tool, but tangible connection to knowledge they had encountered. Its presence would serve as a reminder of lessons learned and skills developed, while its unusual properties would continue revealing themselves through practical application in days to come. As they emerged from behind the waterfall's curtain into fading afternoon light, both father and son paused briefly to reorient themselves to the natural world's different rhythms and sensations. After hours in the forge's controlled environment, the wilderness seemed simultaneously more chaotic and more invigorating. Wind's unpredictable movements, water's thunderous descent, forest's complex symphony of subtle sounds. "We should return someday," Athrys suggested as they began their homeward journey through the snow-covered forest. "There's so much more to learn there." Kratos considered this with characteristic thoroughness before responding. "Perhaps, when purpose requires it." This wasn't dismissal, but recognition that such places deserved visitation with proper intention rather than casual curiosity. Respect for the knowledge preserved there and the traditions it represented. As they moved through deepening twilight toward home, the knife at Atreus' belt occasionally caught stray moonlight breaking through cloud cover, its embedded patterns momentarily shimmering with subtle luminosity, as if responding to natural transitions between day and night. These responses suggested the object had indeed incorporated knowledge beyond mere physical properties, becoming something that existed simultaneously in material and more subtle dimensions. "The blade reminds me of Mother's knife," Atreus observed, noting similarities not in physical appearance but in underlying essence. How both objects seemed to contain wisdom beyond their physical form. How both responded to environments in ways ordinary tools did not. This comparison held significance beyond mere observation, suggesting connections between seemingly separate traditions that shared fundamental understandings despite cultural differences. Faye's Jotnar heritage and the dwarven crafting philosophy apparently recognized similar truths about relationships between physical objects and the knowledge they could embody. Different traditions, similar understandings, Mimir commented, his scholarly perspective recognizing patterns across disparate cultures. The giants and dwarfs maintained certain philosophical parallels despite their historical conflicts, particularly regarding how knowledge might be preserved through physical objects, rather than merely written records. This perspective offered new appreciation for crafting as knowledge preservation rather than merely practical production, suggesting alternate understanding of objects they had encountered throughout their journey. Perhaps many items dismissed as merely magical tools actually served as repositories for wisdom that might otherwise be lost through conventional records destruction. As night fully claimed the forest, stars emerging in gaps between snow-laden clouds, both travelers maintained comfortable silence, processing their experiences individually while sharing unspoken appreciation for what they had encountered. The Forge's lessons would continue revealing themselves in coming days, its influence extending beyond the physical object they had created to inform their understanding of creation itself. The newly crafted knife represented more than mere practical acquisition. It embodied connection to ancient wisdom, participation in traditions that transcended individual crafters to preserve knowledge across generations. Its presence at Atreus's belt would serve as a reminder that creation involved more than technical skill, requiring harmony between intention, material, and deeper understanding of how these elements might work together toward purposes that honored rather than exploited their essential natures. In the fires of the Forgotten Forge, they had encountered not just ancient craft, but timeless wisdom, teaching that would continue guiding them long after this particular journey concluded, influencing not just how they approached physical creation, but how they understood their own roles within larger patterns, spanning realms and generations. And so our journey through the realms draws to a close for tonight. May Hypnos, god of sleep, watch over you as you drift through dreams of legendary proportions. If these tales of gods and monsters helped guide you to restful sleep, consider supporting our journey by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support gives me the strength to continue sharing these stories night after night. Remember, these videos play uninterrupted through the night, with no ads to disturb your slumber, just the soothing sounds of mythic realms to accompany your dreams. For those seeking passage to exclusive content, our Patreon offers early access to all videos and special playlists crafted to enhance your sleep. The link awaits in the description below. Until our next journey together, may your sleep be deep, your dreams be mighty, and your rest be undisturbed by the conflicts of gods and men. Sleep well, brave one.